He lives upstairs from Lindsay and Connor. The meeting of the Somerville Planning Board for July 23rd, 2025 will please come to order. Adequate notice of this meeting, as required by the Open Public Meeting Act, has been provided. A copy of the notice specifying the date, time, and location was 1, published to the Courier News, 2, posted on the bulletin board outside of Borough Hall, 3, posted to the municipal website, and 4, given to the clerk administrator. This meeting is a judicial proceeding. Any questions or comments must be limited to the issues the board may legally consider in reaching a decision, and the decorum appropriate to a judicial hearing must be maintained at all times. Roll call.
Andrea Dare. Here. Chris Eddix.
Here.
Art Akins.
Here.
Larry Cleveland.
Here.
Jason Kraska.
Here.
John Manilio.
Here.
Barry Van Horn.
Here.
Mayor Gallagher.
Here.
Councilmember Vroom.
Here.
Chairperson Werner.
Here. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I need a motion for approval of minutes from July 9th.
So moved. Second.
Chris Eddix.
Yes.
Art Akins.
Yes.
Larry Cleveland.
Yes.
Jason Kraska.
Yes.
Mayor Gallagher.
Yes.
Councilmember Vroom.
Yes.
Chairperson Werner.
Yes. All right, we have no resos and we have no hearings, so we're going to move right into, we do have a presentation that we will be doing this evening from Rutgers Blaustein School. I normally don't read intros, but I am going to read this one, so I do not mess this up. So we have Professor William Irving, Master of Public Policy here. Will Irving joined the Blaustein School as an associate professor of practice in fall of 2023, returning to Rutgers following a 3-year stint as an economic policy and revenue analyst at the New Jersey Treasury. Prior to his work at Treasury, Will was for many years a project manager at the Blaustein School and served as associate director of Rutgers Economic Advisory Service, overseeing their quarterly economic forecast. His current appointment resumes that work as part of the New Jersey State Policy Lab. His research interests include economic forecasting, state and local economics, and taxation and public policy. He received his MPP from the Blaustein School in 2005 and his BA in history from University of California, Santa Cruz in 1993. Other governmental and private sector research clients and sponsors include New Jersey Highlands Council, New Jersey Transit, Williams Pipeline Company, PSE&G, New Jersey Associate of Mental Health and Addiction Agencies, Lockheed Martin, National Science Foundation, Medical Society of New Jersey, New Jersey Apartment Association, Goldman Sachs, New Jersey American Water, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, Federal Emergency Management Agency, New Jersey Retail Merchants Association, Bio New Jersey, ExxonMobil, and others. There's others there. So we welcome Professor Irving. And before I have him up, I just want to explain one of the reasons we wanted to do this is we had done this, I'm going to say a decade ago. We'll just keep it there because I don't know the exact number of years that it was. As an overview of where trends, what we're seeing, this is very high level. This is not specific to Somerville. We wanted to kind of see what that trend was nationally, state-wise, et cetera. His expertise is, we're very excited for it, let's say that. So without further ado, Professor Irving.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can I get this closer?
A little closer, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairwoman Werner, Mayor Gallagher, and the Planning Board, and thank you to Colin Driver, who was kind enough to reach out to me regarding this discussion. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that this will be a useful conversation. Before I start, I just wanted to give a little bit of a plug to our unit at Rutgers, RECON, which is the Rutgers Economic Advisory Service, which provides economic analysis and consulting services to state agencies, as well as local governments, such as this, private entities, as you heard from that extensive client list, which I did not realize was going to be read in its entirety. We use a number of different modeling tools for forecasting, simulations, economic impact analysis. We generally release, at this point, 3 state economic forecasts per year by subscription, and we currently operate in cooperation and sort of under the auspices of the New Jersey State Policy Lab, which is a collaboration of the Blaustein School at Rutgers, New Brunswick, and the School of Public Affairs and Administration at Rutgers, Newark. They provide design, analysis, and consulting on the full range of state policy issues, ranging from housing, energy, transportation, education, and the like. I would also, after my conversation with Mayor Gallagher, like to also give a plug to the Blaustein Center for Local Government, which is a relatively new, but not brand new, research center at the Blaustein School, which addresses a lot of the issues that I've had in just these brief conversations prior to this presentation. So I encourage you to please reach out to me or to the Center for Local Government at the Blaustein School for further discussions. Moving on. What I would like to do today is to cover some of the features of our most recent forecast and some of the trends and concerns that we see there. I'll talk about some of the key economic indicators that we track, primarily gross domestic product and employment, and some of the outlook for demographic change. I'll also talk a bit about some possible alternative scenarios that might be looming out there. What I'll be discussing primarily is our baseline forecast. I'll speak a bit about the fact that this is quite a time to be trying to forecast what's going to happen with the economy, be it at the national or the state level. It's hard to get forecasting right, even in times of relative policy predictability. And right now, things are changing very fast. So something to keep in mind is that it's difficult right now to pin down kind of what we think of as the baseline. This is particularly relevant, I think, as you're probably aware, when we talk about tariff policy and exactly what the implications will be for the national economy. Our forecasting model is driven in part by a national forecast provided by Moody's. That national forecast for our current state forecast is from their June national forecast. There have been a number of recent new tariff-related announcements since that forecast was released. And so we have sort of a month-to-month, these forecasts are released monthly by Moody's, and in the interim at any given time we can have significant changes. I would say probably faster moving changes than we are used to. And so everything is in flux, and I encourage everyone to kind of keep that in mind as we kind of discuss what the baseline is. I will talk about some alternative scenarios as well that give kind of a range of where things may go. So to start off, this is a snapshot of kind of the shorter and longer term outlook for some of the major indicators from our most recent forecast. I should note that this forecast is actually still something of a work in progress. These figures are subject to revision. This has not been published or released yet, but should be within the next week to 2 weeks. We do not expect that there will be significant deviation in our final baseline forecast with regard to these indicators. This forecast, as I said, is based on Moody's June forecast, so prior to the most recent tariff announcements regarding Mexico, Canada, and most recently Japan. Moody's baseline June national forecast reflects an expectation of an increased average effective tariff rate from 3% to about 15%, and extension of the tax cuts under the TCJA, which was more recently enacted, as well as increased deportations and border enforcement. I think the first thing that sort of catches your eye as we look at these numbers is that there's a large drop-off in state GDP, the key measure of economic output. GDP as well as employment this year and next, a significant slowdown in economic growth. The U.S. falls off sharply as well, but not quite as sharply as New Jersey. And our growth rate will tend to be, on average, over the longer term, about a percentage point slower generally than that of the U.S. Employment growth is forecast to weaken pretty sharply as well. with even employment losses hitting the state next year before a slow recovery begins. Population growth, which has been strong in recent years and was strong in the last decade, is projected to slow sharply over the medium and longer term. And I'll talk a bit about that in some more detail a little bit later in the presentation as well. On consumer prices, Moody's has been pretty consistent in their assumption that most of the extreme tariffs will eventually actually ease off and be rolled back, probably by the end of the year, which is why you see inflation actually easing in 2025 to 3.3%, and then slowing as the tariff costs are sort of built into underlying prices. So we actually return to sort of the Fed's general target level of 2% over the medium to longer term. So this is just a quick sort of snapshot of our changes in the forecast from the last forecast. And that forecast was based on Moody's December outlook. This was our winter forecast. So it was actually after the election, but prior to the inauguration. And so it incorporated, based on sort of, I guess, more vague rhetoric about tariffs, but without specifics, it did incorporate some assumption of higher tariffs and tightening immigration policy, but not on a scale of what's been proposed so far through the first half of this year. So our outlook for GDP this year had already shown a significant slowdown. So you can see under 2025 that it actually did not change. We were expecting already a fairly significant drop at the state level. We did expect there to be thereafter a recovery next year. That has now evaporated, and we are expecting actually a bit more of a drop-off. There are indeed, along with that, some negative growth quarters later this year, and I believe one for the state in the 2026 forecast, which may preface something along the lines of a mild recession, but we are not there yet. I'm not ready to make that kind of a pronouncement. You can see that the effects of national tariff policy are reflected in the outlook for the Consumer Price Index, which is up. The outlook is up 0.7 of a percentage point from the prior forecast for this year, and about 0.5 percentage point from the prior forecast for next year. The outlook for employment has weakened considerably, particularly next year, with possible job losses and the unemployment rate spiking to over 5%. In the shorter term, this weakening picture will put pressure on already fragile budgets. Lower employment, higher unemployment, sustained higher prices, reduced commerce and shipping, depressed output will all put downward pressure on tax revenue. In most of the scenarios that we see, in the medium to sort of longer term, the economy does return to a pattern of fairly slow growth, but that's across most scenarios, even more dire scenarios that I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. The question is that, so even though those sort of longer waves might not look so different when we go out a number of years, the short-term effect on public investment decisions that affect that future may well have consequences. I am not going to dwell long on this slide. I was going to talk more about it, but suffice to say, this is really meant generally to demonstrate the relationship between economic growth at the national level and that at the state level. That first column kind of gives you a sense of where New Jersey has been over the past 25 years, lagging the U.S. on average by about 0.8 of a percentage point. And we see that going forward as well as being the pattern. Over that previous 25-year period, the sort of lagging has been fairly broadly distributed across economic sectors, across industries, particularly non-durable manufacturing, and within that, pharmaceutical and chemical manufacturing has seen a significant lag, and construction as well. Construction has been about flat in terms of real growth over that period for the United States, In New Jersey, it's declined, real construction output has declined at a rate of about 1% annually. New Jersey's employment growth of late, particularly over the past 2 years, which is about the time that I have been back at Rutgers doing this work, and so somewhat confoundingly, has been characterized by a lot of volatility, with significant and large revisions to monthly and annual numbers that have made it very difficult to forecast. That said, employment growth was down to about 1% on an annual average basis in 2024, so we've now moved well out of the COVID recovery period and are settling into a slower growth trajectory similar to probably the last couple of years prior to COVID, when we were adding around 30,000 jobs annually. Year-to-date employment growth has been very sluggish, and we're down about 10,000 jobs. Normally, I'd be concerned that this indicates that we'll end the year well below our forecast of about 0.6% growth this year. However, as of July last year, the state had only added 8,700 jobs, but after the annual revisions this past spring, the final gain for the year was just under 40,000, so there's still quite a bit of year to go. And as I said, we've seen such a significant amount of volatility with adjustments and revisions to the data that have been released over the past couple of years, that it's very difficult to say where things are going, even if it looks like a very down year at present. Having said that, as I noted before, we see significant downturn and even losses next year before we recover to a sluggish 0.5% growth rate or lower over the longer term, with growth largely limited to a few sectors, including trade, transportation, and utilities, professional and business services, and the education and health sector, with the goods-producing industries largely flat or declining in their employment. I do think that our current forecast is probably underestimating healthcare hiring right now, and that may be corrected the next time we update our equations in the model. Again, though, the annual pace of hiring in that sector has about tripled since the pre-COVID era, and I don't think that that is a sustainable pace, even with our aging population. We are starting to see a bit of a let-up in that sector's growth through the first half of this year compared to the last couple of years, and we suspect that that will continue. So population. New Jersey has been losing population to other states at a significant rate for at least the last couple of decades. Domestic outmigration averaged about 50,000 from 2010 to 2020 based on data, and I say this, this is an important point, that's based on data prior to what we call the intercensal revisions that followed the decennial census in 2020. You may be aware that the decennial census in 2020 indicated that the annual population estimates for the state throughout that decade, from 2010 to 2020, had missed significantly in terms of what the actual population growth was. The original estimates, in other words, the annual estimates that the census releases of state growth, indicated that we'd added about less than 100,000 people from July 2010 to July 2020, but the decennial count in 2020 showed us that the increase was actually closer to 500,000. Unfortunately, when the Census Bureau then goes back and revises those annual numbers, those annual changes, the so-called intercensal estimates, they do not revise the components of that change. So it's hard to make definitive statements about what was actually going on, what was driving that fairly significant population growth compared to what the estimates were thought to be. But given the experience of prior decades and these more recent revisions, it would not be surprising to find that the factor underlying those errors was an undercounting of international migration. And that's really what's kept and continues to keep state population from going into decline. It's significant international in-migration. You can see here the estimates for last year, and indeed in the absence of significant immigration, we would have seen a population decline of about 9,000 people. It's probably also worth mentioning some of the other recent revisions. The original annual releases for 2020 through 2023 basically had New Jersey with a net zero population growth for that period, 2020 to 2023. This year, they revised those estimates and now actually show gains of over 100,000 over that period, with the estimate for international migration revised up by over 90,000 based on a new methodology for producing those estimates. And last year, we saw even larger growth with significant international inflow, again offsetting significant domestic outmigration. Our model has generally been pretty bearish on population growth for the state long term, mostly due to an outlook for slower population growth nationally, coupled with a national pattern that has seen growth shift largely to the south and west of the nation, partly at the expense of the Northeast. While these domestic and international migration patterns are not explicitly represented in our model, this administration's approach to immigration is reflected in the national forecast for population change, and thus indirectly in our longer-term outlook, which calls for growth of about 0.1% annually, compared to about 0.5% over the 2010 to 2020 period. On a more localized level, and this will be the one time that I had a chance to dig into some local data. If my research was correct, Somerville has added about 2,000 residents since the decennial census, which is actually about 17% of the county total of about 12,000, an increase of about 12,000, most of which is accounted for by international migration. Just like the nation, New Jersey's population is aging. I think we all are aware of this, and an aging population portends increasing costs and further dominance of the healthcare sector in employment growth, which is why I think we may be underestimating that sector in our current employment outlook. The structural breakdown that you see here of the forecast for population growth by age cohort may look quite a bit different from this. This is close to the national breakdown. We have a little bit faster growth, I believe, in that older cohort here, and a little bit faster decline in that youngest cohort. This may not be borne out if older people continue to leave the state due to the high cost of living. It'll be interesting to see whether policies like Stay NJ will be successful in retaining that population. Just a brief look at the real estate outlook for house prices. We expect price increases to continue, but to moderate over the longer term compared to recent years. This year we'll still see significant increases for existing and new homes, but we expect over the longer term for those rates to moderate, particularly for existing homes. You can see there in those last two columns of the table a drop for existing home price, the rate of increase of existing home prices from 6.5% annually over the last 10 years to about 3.8% over the next 10 years in the current forecast. Building permits are very difficult to forecast. They're very difficult even to track. There's a lot of volatility. You can see for multifamily, indication of significant decreases there that I believe are mainly just following with a lag the national pattern. Whether that is borne out in reality is difficult to say and is affected significantly by state and local policy. Finally, and I apologize that I did not want to overwhelm you with like 20 more slides, and so I took what is a very packed table and just threw it onto a slide. Some form of this will appear in our published forecast, the longer version, which you have to subscribe to. But this is a quick overview of the trajectories of a few of the alternative scenarios compared to the baseline. And I will try to give just a quick description. Underneath the baseline, which we've covered in terms of expectations for most of these indicators, There is, and each of these, I should say, each of these scenarios is based on one of Moody's national scenarios. So we take the Moody's national scenario, we take our state history and our state projections, and we sort of apply these different national scenarios to our state, to our state model. The 10% upside scenario basically means it's 10%, there's a 10%, only a 10% chance, as far as Moody's is concerned, that the national economy will do better than this. Under this, the average effective tariff rate is down to 10% by the end of the year. The wars in Ukraine and the Middle East abate fairly quickly. Global growth increases, particularly in China and Europe, which increases the demand for U.S. exports. And you can see under this scenario, we have improved outcomes in New Jersey, particularly in terms of employment and the unemployment rate. GDP is also much improved, though we lag the U.S. by a bit of a wider margin than we do in the baseline. The 25% downside scenario is, again, the scenario where we would expect there's only a 25% chance that the economy would do worse than this. Tariffs remain high. The wars persist. Weakening European economies dampen demand for U.S. exports, and a mild recession nationally takes hold next year. And that recession, as you can see, is a little bit worse for the state, actually significantly worse next year, but with a fairly robust recovery the following year. The final scenario reflected here in this table is a stagflation scenario to which no particular percentage of likelihood is assigned. What it does assume is that we end up with significantly higher tariffs and that accelerated deportations lead to labor shortages, and together these factors drive higher inflation, leading the Fed to, so after a period of significant inflation, the Fed then comes in and raises rates next year, leading to a fairly deep recession. And those negative effects then tend to hit a little bit later and a little bit deeper, as you can see, with employment dropping by 3.8% in 2027, with a drop of 0.6% in GDP in New Jersey, followed by an even deeper drop the following year. In all these cases, we do tend to return to an equilibrium after several years, which is to say these are not necessarily, whether they are positive or negative scenarios, they are not necessarily long-abiding trends. There are some Moody's scenarios that look at, without, again, similar to the stagflation scenario, without necessarily positing a specific probability, but that look at what the effects might be of protracted downturns, of much longer declines in output. And that is the conclusion of my talk for now. I'm happy to take your questions, and I hope that was useful.
It was, thank you. I'm going to open it up to the board for questions.
You're going to call on me last, I know.
Anybody? Mayor Gallagher.
All right, so first of all, thank you. As the chairwoman had said, we did this a number of years ago, and it kind of began to lay the framework of how Somerville developed themselves. And as this board and as the council goes into another phase of what's next, we're beginning to look at our master plan, we're looking at our zoning ordinances, we're looking at our redevelopment areas. And in order to do that effectively, you know, the chairwoman and the board felt it wise to begin those discussions so we can see where the future lies for us, so that we can make those informed decisions as we did a decade and a half ago in order to have success of what you see in Somerville now. So that's kind of where we're going with this, that we're starting at the high level, the bigger economics, and we then want to kind of work our way down to the Somerville-specific economics and the Main Street economics. Because the Main Street's our economic engine. It has the potential to have a very positive effect on our residential tax base if it's successful, and vice versa. So we need to ensure that the economic engine continues. So we have to understand what's happening at this level in order to create policy decisions for the local level. And that's kind of our broad overview of what we're trying to do, and that's more, I think, for the public than it is for you. Obviously, you do this for a living, so. I found it interesting. I mean, New Jersey, you said New Jersey lags the US in a lot in terms of economic growth, a little bit. And one of them was in particular manufacturing. And, you know, we've seen that in the last 40 years. Manufacturing, 50 years, has just kind of flown the coop.
50% at least of employment has evaporated over that period.
Yeah, it's pretty striking. What do you see, I mean, I don't know if you can answer this, but how do you see AI affecting all of this, artificial intelligence? Right? How much time do we have?
Right. Like other revolutions in automation, I think I can't give you a good answer. I can't give you an answer that talks about numbers.
Right.
Past sort of revolutions in automation, right,
Yes.
have rearranged the way that we work without necessarily eliminating jobs. That's certainly, I think, the hopeful scenario is that it creates new avenues of opportunity. Having said that, it seems to have more potential to replace work maybe than replace certain types of work than certain past technologies have. You know, I could find myself fighting an AI bot for my job. I think it's possible. It has, you know, certainly infiltrated the university space, in a number of ways, both positive and negative, where it can be, I think from the perspective of education in the university, we're still at a point where, you know, this is a technology that for our purposes synthesizes information, and we discourage students from not synthesizing it themselves.
Right.
Where it will take us in terms of economic growth, I'm not.
It's all over the map.
educated
Yeah, and
enough to
I wouldn't,
say.
yeah, I mean, it's more of a discussion than it is
Yeah.
an answer.
I mean, I think it's you know, we spoke prior to this presentation about sort of the current environment of uncertainty. And, you know, that's sort of one element of the current sort of policy environment is sort of uncertainty. I talked about sort of the fast changing environment. And I think AI is the same thing right now. It's changing every day what we hear that AI can do, and sort of, you know, these comparisons that say it can do this amazing thing, but it, you know, often does dumb things. And it's so just that broad range of possibility speaks both to opportunity, but also to, well, you know, can it really do things? When will it be able to do things well enough that we need to start worrying?
Well, yeah, and I think part of that is, you know, us, I don't know if we'll ever figure it out, or at least be able to project, you know, where AI has a great benefit in one area, it will have a detriment in another. But when there's a detriment, there's typically an advantage somewhere else, and it's trying to find out where that advantage is. And, you know, I look at it, it's going to affect professional, retail, residential. But does that drive people to stay more where they are? I don't know. And does that then bode very well for downtowns? And that's, you know, I'm trying to figure that out. This board's going to try to figure it out, not just from the AI side. That's just a component of it. But, you know, how do we map out our community not just our downtown, but our entire 2.5 square miles of awesome, for, you know, the next 20 years. And as you say, you know, it may not be a straight line. It's changing. And layer in New Jersey on top of that change, and you know, because New Jersey's a little bit different. So it's a lot of home rule, and it's a challenge, and that's kind of what we're trying to figure out. You know, you had the 2,000 population increase. That's probably about right. I don't know that, you said a majority of it was international migration.
That's for the county.
That's
So
for the county.
That's for the,
Okay.
yeah, the majority of the county's increase,
Yeah.
and Somerville accounted for, I guess, about 16% of
Yeah,
of the
okay.
county's increase.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most counties are, this net domestic outmigration problem, I think, hits most counties, you know.
And the cause of that, I would assume, a couple of causes. Age, taxes.
Sometimes.
I think that's probably a lot of the times on that. You know, it's, you know, when you retire, you got this much money and it's got to go this far. And how do you figure that out? So, you know, that's a challenge, and it's not a challenge we can fix, but it is a challenge we can have an effect on from a local municipal side. And, you know, those are the kinds of things we have to look at as well. So it's.
There are, I think, as, you know, there are, those, I guess, what you would think of as the high cost of living, pushing seniors out, high taxes, maybe discouraging, you know, some people, are kind of, I guess, what we'd call push factors. And then there's also pull factors, right, from other places, whether that is economic opportunity, whether that is, you know, all the different factors that have moved so much population from the north. You know, we've seen this sort of shift in population toward the south and the west over the past 15 to 20 years, I think it is. And there's so many things that go into that, and it's not only sort of New Jersey that has, I think, seen some of that movement.
Can you talk a little bit more about housing stock and you know, where you see that going, the need for housing? You know, there's a lot of talk right now. Somerville's done a lot of development, a lot of redevelopment. You know, we've taken older dilapidated areas, we've taken contaminated areas, and we've converted them into, you know, productive pieces of property in our community. What does the future bring? What's the next 20 years, 30 years in terms of, I know you're saying population, young population is going down, which will have an effect on our schools. So that's, I don't want to say a benefit, because every community should be filled with kids. That's just, it makes it cool, makes it fun. But it's going to have an effect on schools, which also then has an effect on your taxes. So, you know, what you see in one area going up, you may see in another area going down a little bit. So what's, you know, just talk a little bit about the housing.
That's something I may have to get back to you
That's
on
fine.
more.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's the changing age structure of the population. It's the if we are correct, the sort of very severe or significant slowdown in population growth. At the same time, I think you know, there's plenty of demand for affordable housing, and you know, housing shortages have contributed to the significant price increases in housing, which have been sustained really very much in the Northeast, more so than elsewhere in the country. And these kind of opposing forces of needing housing, yet facing a very slowing population, slowing growth in population, make it kind of a difficult issue to think about, and what kind of development we need, right? And who's going to be filling it, and what is the population going to look like?
Is the housing demand tied to the inflow of migrants? You know, I think the number was 90,000 last year. I thought that was the number.
95.
Yeah, so, you know, there's kind of a nexus there, and I'm not trying to get political, it's just, I'm trying to look at economics.
Right.
And if you have this huge demand, and you said that, if you have this huge demand and not enough supply, it's gonna drive the cost of that supply up.
That's right, that,
Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah.
That said, the net increase in population over time is going to be slowing. So,
Yeah.
you know, you also don't want to see yourself go into population decline, right? I think the things that make New Jersey an attractive place to live can also sometimes be the things that cost a lot and make New Jersey an unattractive place to live.
You know what, you're right, and what's interesting is, you know, prior to, well, I'll say maybe, Rich, you'll be able to tell me, the population of Somerville was closer to 15,000 back in the 80s, I think at the peak, 70s,
Back to
80s?
late 60s,
Yeah.
early 70s.
Yeah, and from there was a significant decline until we hit the low of about 12,500, where it stagnated for a number of years. And what's interesting is with the economic success you're seeing in Somerville, now the population begins to go up, and it's just it's a ride. You're going to get your chance in a second.
Yeah.
If I can just jump in on
Yeah,
that.
I'm done. Yeah.
No. The, is there any analysis with the, you know, rental versus purchase, with the outlook going forward?
Not that we have sort of in our standard kind of modeling going forward. I would have to sort of look into that specifically and get back to you.
That's round two.
That's round two. There you go.
I have a quick, it's actually more of an observation. I kind of want to make sure that, and I think some of this would be for the public and the planning board as well, is one of the biggest significant changes or differences I'm seeing from when the last time we actually sat through this and listened where the economy was going, where the state was going, where the nation was going, is we are in such an influx of uncertainty, where a decade and a half ago, there was a little bit more certainty in where things would be going. But with that, I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is we made, you know, a lot of our decisions back then when we were really looking at what type of housing we wanted to move forward on. We, and some of it wasn't from this, some of that was that very specific towards Somerville, right? We knew we had the transient village. That was a big push because of the age groups coming in, which seems to now have been shifted slightly, that's a huge difference for us, right? I'm very shocked at seeing that 18 to 64 basically flatlining now, and the elder population of over 64 continuing to rapidly increase, because that's not what we had seen over the last couple decades here in Somerville. We were seeing that we needed to provide housing for young adults coming out of college or going through college or starting, you know, and they didn't want, you know, back then the trend was they were not like we did in a lot of our generations coming out of college buying your first home immediately, right? They did not want to buy homes. They wanted something else to be able to do that first decade of their life with, right, into adulthood. When I say adulthood, after college. I know we're all adults at 18, but they're not really adults. I can say that with the 4 kids I have.
Absolutely not.
They're not really adults till later. But that, to me, is a big trend, at least for us on the planning board, as we're looking at master plans and those kind of indicators trigger me more of trying to understand and say, these are differences that we are not used to, right? And that's coupled with the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen. The decline of the 0 to 17 so rapidly, with yet 18 to 64 staying the same, you know, and that again becomes not something specific to Somerville, but is that because people are having less children? Because that's always something we've talked about, is that certain generations, they increase in their younger, you know, more kids, more family, versus they level off. And again, that affects the type of housing that we might be looking for, or the services. Because remember, our master plan isn't necessarily just about housing. It's about the services that we offer to those. And such a higher aging population, some of those services need to be looked at. Can we keep up with that? Because to your point, the last thing we want is a population decline, because, as a resident, what happens, then that tax burden now goes to dispersed over less people, right? And thinking about that, I think that to me that stuck out the most to me as something that, even through this uncertainty, seeing that is something that we would need to think about, which is probably prompting a lot of the questions of why, what are you seeing in those types of housing? Because it was, I don't want to say it was clear cut then, right? It wasn't, but you could see a trend coming and a need coming where I don't really feel like, I almost feel like the whole country as a whole, and this isn't political statement, is on a reset, right? And with that reset comes a lot of uncertainty.
And that's partly, I think, this changing age structure, which is significant but not necessarily sudden. And, this is only one scenario of that. You can find different age cohort forecasts that will be generally similar, but might be shaped a little bit differently for the state and for the nation. To your point about, you had young people coming out of college that weren't looking to go buy their first home in the suburbs. We spoke about Jim Hughes, who used to come and give this talk. Jim tracked that for a long time, and for many years talked about this big change in the way that young people, and not even just out of college, but people in their 30s, even in their 40s, were wanting to live. They were looking for mixed-use environments within walkable communities, the kind of things that Somerville, I think, has sought to develop over the last 25 years, that they were looking for these mixed-use environments that kind of reverse the trend of their parents, right, the suburbanization. And I do recall talking to him, I don't know, a couple of years ago about maybe starting to see sort of that trend starting to reverse a little bit. Maybe some people are starting to look for those, wanting more land, wanting their own space. COVID obviously played a role in accelerating that, but I think there were some seeds of it starting to appear even prior to COVID. As to the sort of uncertainty, and forecasters and forecasting tends to be inherently conservative. We don't like to go out on limbs and say, next year the economy is going to grow by 10%, right? We've talked about these scenarios and these significant effects of current policies that are being implemented at the national level and at the state level that that we are, under our baseline assumptions right now, expecting to cause some pain over the next couple of years. That's not all that new. Jim Hughes used to start every talk by saying, I've often been called the Jack Kevorkian of the New Jersey economy because I've predicted 10 of the last 7 recessions. And this is so, I think there is sort of an inclination to be somewhat reserved in our expectations, to be particularly coming out of first the Great Recession, then COVID, to see, I think I personally maybe am a little bit sort of reticent to look too hard at anything that looks like it's going to grow fast. And so it'll be interesting to see sort of as both state and national policy play out, I think over the next year. I think, hopefully, maybe we get a little bit less uncertainty, and that can help. I wrote a blog post for the State Policy Lab about a month ago, kind of prefacing this forecast, but really addressing the issue of tariffs and uncertainty. And they affect things. Tariffs affect things in a number of ways. They affect, and without going into sort of the specifics of that, they affect tariffs and any other kind of announced policy affect behavior anticipatorially, so people begin to change their economic behavior in businesses and individuals in anticipation of prices going up. Then there's the actual implementation of whatever the policy might be will have its own effects. And in the meantime, there's the uncertainty that surrounds it. And so you kind of have a three-pronged kind of effect that's very hard to pin down. And I think, time will I hope and think that sort of, maybe a year from now, we'll be able to hope. I don't know that I hope my forecast is accurate, but I think we'll be able to maybe put kind of smaller brackets around it, constrain the uncertainty around wherever we think things are going, maybe a little bit more.
So it's interesting. So, and the chair brings up a number of great points. So if you think back to 2008, 2009, when the world crashed, it was just an economic hoo-ha. We, the council and the planning board, had decisions to make at that time. And we were in full flare of our redevelopment efforts and trying to move this forward. And we had two choices. One choice was to lick our wounds, kind of hunker down, wait it out, or we could look at the decline as an opportunity. And we went on a trajectory and charged ahead. And that's exactly what we did. So that when things did recover and rebound, we were far ahead of everybody else. And that's a credit to the council and to the planning board at that time. And I look at this time, again, as an opportunity. And I think we're still in a much better position now. If you take a look at our municipality, whether it's residential, commercial, it doesn't matter. We are in a great time. When we began that process, the planning board has the luxury of looking 20 years out, 30 years out, and trying to figure out what that is. And the borough council, we look at today and tomorrow. I mean, I don't mean just today and tomorrow. It's probably a couple, few years out. But that's our role. That's the council's role. The planning board's role is to vision, to go forward. And I think this begins to lay that groundwork. And I think what Lisa said was really important, that it's not just about housing. As we look at our master plan, this is about the effects of what's happening in our population, what's happening in our commercial residential districts. How do we provide for the future for them, whether that's economically, commercially, recreationally, historically? So you have all these different elements of our master plan that now begin to play into this as well. And this is that first step as we begin that process of figuring out what's next for Somerville for the next 20, 25, 30 years. So.
Anybody else on the board? Go ahead, Larry.
We've hammered the aging population issue. To me, it seems like that
Your mic?
is, the aging slide, that's the one we should be focused on, because that's where the people are. That's where the money is. We need to do more in that direction, only because everybody's gonna get old. Everybody's gonna get old.
Not me, Larry.
Well, not you. I'm gonna die before I get old. That's okay.
That was good. I like it.
Yeah. But the way these trends are, it seems to me that, and also, 2050 is never gonna come. We all know that. Not for me, anyway. But the aging population, that's where, if we want to maintain people staying in town and staying around and being vital members, that's where our focus is, because Spencer Cleveland, that's my son, is not going to go buy a house like my house. He'll do that in 20 years when he has kids, because they push all that stuff out.
Yeah.
We did it 10 years after our parents. They're going to do it 20 years after
Yeah,
their parents.
good point.
So that the trend is going to be that. I think that's the most interesting.
Well, and these numbers are borne out by the Board of Ed's numbers that they just did in their referendum. They're right on.
Yeah.
They're seeing the population decline in the schools.
So we should have things like additional, like 55 and older communities, that people can live there like they have in Franklin Township or Somerset Township.
Well, and I think it also, we just went through the affordable housing, and I think that also, some of this will play into in areas that we want to focus on with our affordable housing, right? So it plays into so many different areas of things that we can still construct through master plan and other plans that we're working on. Even our redevelopment plans, what do we, if there is going to be redevelopment and, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to look at our redevelopment plans, because what we planned for 10, 15 years ago in those areas, not probably, is definitely not where we might see it going in the next 10, 20 years. And we want to make sure that we can dictate that and make sure that we're following those trends to accommodate the residents, current residents, as well as future residents coming into Somerville. So yes, to your point, that's why I think I was so focused on that, because I think at least, even if it is not exact, right? It's if that watching this trend here is really one of the most important basis for everything we do, is because that is the population that will be coming in and we're trying to keep at the same time.
I think it's important also to recognize that it is, well, what we're looking at is the baby boom, is the aging baby boom. They will not be the aging baby boom forever, and they will be replaced by a smaller generation of aging people. So I guess as you think about sort of development decisions, when we think about things like senior housing, things of that nature, for which there is now going to be huge and growing demand, that will not always be the case. And it'll be interesting to see.
Well, I think on
there's a
that-
needle to thread
yeah,
there,
and
I think.
I think on that point, Larry, to tie that in, because you're right, our generation, the generation of our children, I mean, my kids are basically the same age as your kids, and I can say that even with some that are, my two stepchildren that are a little bit older, their decisions in those timeframes are very different than what my time frame was, right, at those ages, which also will impact, to your point, when they become the aging, their decisions are going to be very different than what we're making or we're thinking at our ages. So, and that's the trick of trying to, because we are, I know you said it's a luxury, but it's the burden also that the planning board has, is that we're not looking at next year or the year after. We are trying to plan for that next 20 to 30 years to make sure that what the direction we drive it in is in line with, one, where our not just the country and the state, but our community is going towards, so that we can attract the right people, because development doesn't happen overnight, right? And even change in services doesn't happen, because you need to know what kind of services. So I think it is a luxury, but I think it's that burden also of trying to, and to me, that's why this was so exciting, just because I know that, I might not be as excited as some of my board members, but
I'm ecstatic.
but this was, when we did this 15, 20 years ago, it was a very exciting time, because we see now the fruit from our labor then, and now that we're really kind of trying to say, hey, we see this, but we really need to now look at the next 20 to 30 years. Anybody else on the board before I open up to the public? All right, I'm going to open it up to the public. If you have any questions, comments, come on up, Rich.
I have to identify myself?
Yes, you do.
Yes,
All right,
you
Rich
do.
O'Neill, 124 West Cliff Street, Somerville. I've been here a couple of years, and a lot of what you said I saw. When I was a kid, this was a town in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by farms, but it was an industrial area. You had many, many plants here. A lot of guys got out of high school, went to the plant, and they were going to be there 40 years and sit on their porch. That was the lifestyle. And most of them didn't have cars. They would take the bus down to Calco. Things have changed. There's no way to come out of high school now and walk to the plant. There's no plants. New Jersey has deindustrialized. I mean, it's gone, and I don't think it's ever coming back. It's too expensive to do it here. But what I have seen, as you know, I've run that little museum, that we have a fair amount of floor traffic. And what I've seen coming in are new people in town. The old regulars are still coming, but I see there's an influx of newer people. And there's two groups. There's a younger group, and then there's the older group. The older group are coming from Montgomery, Hillsborough, Bridgewater. They're downsizing. They're living in the apartments. The younger group, they don't want a house. Are going to work here a couple of years. I'm going to transfer. I'm not going to be stuck with a house. They don't have kids. They have dogs. I mean, that's just the way it is. When I was a kid, 5 or 6 or 7 kids in a family was not unusual. It's unheard of today, except in Gallagher's house. All right, but I've seen all this happen. So these statistics here match what's happened. And quite frankly, I think you've done a tremendous job in building a diverse bunch of households. You don't have to be rich to live in Somerville. You can get an apartment. If you are rich, you go upstairs. I mean, everything is here. And what I do, because you all know I'm kind of nosy, when people come in and visit the museum, I'm talking to them. Where'd you come from? Why are you here? What brought you here? And what do you do it yourself? And what I'm finding is a lot of them started just visiting for the restaurants, basically. Then they found themselves coming here more often. Then they're going home looking at 2 acres of grass, and I don't want to do that anymore. And they start coming to Somerville, and they live here. So I think the diverse number of apartments of all different, basically pretty much almost all economic realms are here. You know, people can live here, and they can afford to live here. But they're older people. There's no kids in that house. There's younger people. They all have a dog, and that's who's come here. And I don't think that's going to change for a long time. Even as these younger kids get older, if they have kids or more dogs, whatever they do, the way they talk, they don't really want a house. They don't want to be tied to it. They can't move. Their jobs are uncertain. And if you're stuck with a house, you can't sell it. What do you do? Should I stop now?
No, it's great observations.
That's all I do is look.
Anybody else? Mayor Sullivan.
Good evening, Dennis Sullivan, 8 South Richards Avenue, and I'll put my homeowner and resident hat on. Somerville is a success story because of a lot of people that put the hard work in. One thing that looking forward, our housing stock is aging, and I represent that aging segment of the population. In about 10 years, my little house will be 100 years old, and that's not atypical. And what worries me is that there'll be pressure to, demolish those old houses and combine lots and do what we've done successfully with contaminated properties. But South Richards Avenue, North Clark, Demont, they're not contaminated. And I just worry that there'll be pressure to, as it happened in Staten Island. The 50 by 100-foot lots had Cape Cods. They got demolished. There's now duplexes with an underground garage. So I think it's going to be incumbent as we move forward for the planning board, the zoning board, and the council to look at some sort of rehabilitation credit program. Years and years ago, we put an ordinance in where if you do a home improvement and you do it with licenses and permits, you get a 5-year abatement. I don't know how updated that's been, but at that, there used to be a $25,000 limit on improvements. If that hasn't changed, I think that should be looked at because you can't build a kitchen for $25,000 anymore.
We're going to talk to the state on that one.
Yeah.
It's capped.
But I think there's going to be, as the population ages, the housing's aging too. And I think it's incumbent to keep what's good about our older housing stock, but give the homeowner an incentive to stay and maybe encourage his kids to inherit it and move back. Thank you.
I want to make a comment on that because thank you, Mayor Sullivan. I think that's one of the reasons why we also here as a board took the undertaking of looking at our zoning and looking at some of the restrictions that currently are on our existing homeowners to improve their homes. Because that also can take place where they want to make an improvement and we've tied their hands, right? To your point, having used to live on that road, we are very restricted on roads like that on what they can do to improve their homes because they're automatically non-conforming to new existing. So once you try to put a deck on or you try to redo this or redo that, you are now hitting setback and front and side and backyard setback restraints. So I think that's one of the things that we want to, what we are trying to think of. The other turns over to council. Some of those conversations really wouldn't be here, but I think they are worth exploring. But to your point, that is, again, for the board to hear, that is one of the reasons why we want to look at these things, because we want our residents to improve their homes before they age out so much where it is easy for a developer to come in and say, it's better off just to flatten these 2 blocks and start over, because we don't want that. Those homes have, I hate using that term historical, but there is historical significance, right? They might not be historical homes, but there's historical significance to these neighborhoods and to these areas that we don't want to lose, so.
Yeah, to Lisa's point, we're grappling with issues of the older Victorians in and around Main Street, up and down High Street, Cliff Street. And a lot of them over time had been converted into businesses, and now some of them are being converted back to residential. And they're faced with these challenges now because they have this impervious coverage, they have parking lots, and they're caught in this quagmire between two worlds, and there's no way out. It's classified as a commercial property, and it just becomes very difficult and cumbersome. So that's something that I know, I think we have a subcommittee on, that they're trying to tackle, and at some point they're going to be coming to Historic to say, hey, look, take a look at this, because we're trying to help homeowners, people who are taking an existing beautiful building and they want to convert it back to a single-family home, and they're having challenges. And we're going to work with Historic to try to bring that back to this board so we can bring back a plan to council that says, hey, you know what? We've got to change some things. We have to change some of this zoning to make it happen. So.
Anyone else from the public? Okay, hearing, go ahead, sir.
Hi, John Flores, 389 William Street. I'm on the zoning board, by the way. Great presentation. Thank you for the information. I have one question, particularly about the outflows from the state. Is there a demographic breakdown of those outflows and any kind of research into the purpose or the cause of those outflows?
There is research and debate over the cause of the outflows. There was quite a bit of debate, I'd say it's probably about 15 years ago. There was sort of a whole series of competing reports on sort of what is driving the domestic outflow. Is it taxes? Is it not taxes? Can you demonstrate this statistically? Can you not? I don't think we settled on an answer. I don't think that there's much on the demographics of the outflow. I think there are individual studies where they try to kind of look at, is it the aging population that's moving out? Is the racial or ethnic composition of people moving in? Obviously, with international migration, we have significant, we can say more about the demographics. With domestic outmigration.
Is your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But with domestic, a lot of the data, at least it used to be, and I believe it still is, even what the census publishes is based, at least in part, on fairly limited IRS data. It's the IRS that actually collects a lot, not for international migration, but for state-to-state flows, state-to-state domestic migration flows. What they do is they match returns. So a person filed in one place this year, filed somewhere else next year, or filed in the same place, and that's where most of that data comes from. So there's, I think, a bit on the sort of on the income levels, but that's about it. There may be more through the census, but I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I asked because, I mean, I've traveled around the country and I see a lot of these newer cities in the South and in the Southwest, and I talk to people, and they really talk about cost of living, brand new spaces, job opportunities, because business is moving down there, and it just makes me wonder, you guys on the planning board have a big challenge ahead of you in terms of trying to figure out what's going to happen in the next 20 years, because in the next 20 years, the boomer generation will be all but gone. I mean, I'm a Gen X, and I'll be almost gone, if not already. I'll be soon. But for you guys to have to imagine what this town is going to be like without boomers in it, and what's going to replace that, and how that's affected by outflows, and who's here and who's leaving and who's staying, it's a great challenge. So I wish you all the luck.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Marge Sullivan, 8 South Richards Avenue in Somerville. I just want to dovetail off of something that Larry Cleveland said about go where the demographic has the most people. Having navigated two sets of elderly parents and knowing many of their friends and relatives, most people in the older demographic, of which I'm rapidly becoming part of, prefer to age in place. And Somerville has many attractive features that will allow people to age in place. Your talk devoted a lot of time to the industrial lag, but I think New Jersey economy has strengths which I couldn't tell from some of the slides whether you touched upon them. We should have a big healthcare industry, service industries, and even pharmaceutical production. And Lord knows, Somerville has a hospital right here, and good transportation network. So all of those things are attractive to people who are older, healthier, and want to maintain as many options as they can as they age. So I would say the planning board and the zoning board should think about ways to make Somerville increasingly accessible to people who want to age in place. And that might mean making, doing more about transportation. We have a lot of the apartments and people are living close to the train station, but it might be nice to have some other kinds of transportation that would be helpful to elderly people, not just the county scoot bus. Maybe we could think about that. And as older people are living in apartments, maybe developers could be encouraged to have scoot buses that would take people to the train station if they wanted to go to the supermarket, those kinds of things. So think about how you would help people age in place, and then your demographic will stay and not go to the Sun Belt, where it's even hotter than it is in New Jersey.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, I'm going to close public session for that. Any last minute from the board?
Thank you very much for coming out. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Professor. This was awesome, and we really appreciate you coming, so thank you so much.
We'll see you around 2.
Round two's about Somerville now.
Okay. Pending, sidewalk cafes is on here. Did we have something specifically for that? I don't think we,
I think it was the Dunkin' Donuts.
yes, you wanted to speak about, yes.
Well, it really is just a brief discussion and taking the temperature to see if there's an ability to maybe try a test scenario or not. And I'm happy the DSA is here for this discussion. So I had the opportunity, and it's not a new concept. I had the opportunity to be down in Little Havana in Miami, which was a lot of fun. But they do something a little bit different down there. And their sidewalk seating, so their sidewalks are actually narrower than Somerville's. And their sidewalk seating is actually pushed to the curb line. So the pathway consistently is open, clear, and it runs right down the front of all the storefronts. The concern I had at the time was, can people get in and out of their car when they try to exit? They park and try to exit. Is there going to be an issue when they try to back in? And does the rear end of the car come out over the sidewalk? And so kind of watched and looked, but it worked. And the flow of pedestrian traffic was free, clear, and busy, super busy, on a much narrower sidewalk. So, I came back and I'm, running around town, I'm looking at them going, wouldn't it be interesting to see if we can try it here? And I'm not saying it's going to work, because I do understand Friday nights could be a potential problem. How do people get up close and personal with the cars? But is there an ability to have a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4 different storefronts, restaurant fronts, try it. And let's see what happens. Does it work? I don't know if it'll work or not. We can all say, no, it won't work, or yes, it will work, but we won't know if it'll work until we try it. And if we can find willing store owners, and I've approached a couple, but their immediate reaction was, but if we can find a couple of willing participants, is it worth a shot? Is it worth a test scenario to see if it works? And it may mean people may have to kind of do a bit of a jog at times, but I think we've all seen that there are a couple of restaurants that have in the past pushed their seating out to the curb. I think more so up or across from the courthouse, but it worked. It did work. So I just throw it out to the board for thoughts, comments, and
I have a couple of ideas on that. The first thing is that my understanding is they're gonna start removing the tree grates.
they have.
That's gonna start happening, so that's gonna
Yeah.
claim a lot of
That's happening,
sidewalk
yeah.
space for use for whatever.
Yes.
The challenge is, and if you have to be a jerk about it, get a ruler that's a yardstick and walk down the street. And if you hit anybody, they're in the wrong spot. If they're in the chair, they're in the wrong spot.
Enforcement's already on it.
Well, they gotta
They're-
keep it on because
they are.
that's the biggest problem. And you said the weave, and that's fine, you wanna go this way and that way, as long as it's a constant pathway. But if people have to step in the street, or step over the top of the bricks, or anything else,
being
somebody's
handled.
going to get hurt.
It's being handled.
So, but yes, I think we can try a couple of spots for that.
Yeah.
And shift it out. Maybe in some of the areas that they've already coned off
Yes.
as no parking, they've done hash marks, and now they put the bollards there. That's an excellent spot.
Yeah.
I am going to
for
say,
parking.
to Larry's point, I know that in the past, that was one of the biggest reasons why we had stayed away from it, was because of the grates and the whatever, around the trees.
Yeah.
Because it was limiting the space that could be used. So as those open, I agree. I think that there is definitely areas that, we could probably look at to say, why not open it up to those areas? But again, yes, weaving, because I don't think it's going to go straight across downtown.
Right.
But maybe it's a trend that starts and finishes like that, but yeah.
So,
Yes, we do. I think the answer is yes, we can try it. I do think that those new areas that they did, the hash marks, no parking, and they put the bollards,
Yeah.
that'd be an excellent spot to put seating right against the traffic, because there's nobody can.
Nobody can park there. Yeah.
So that's a way.
so, my only concerns and, off the cuff would be restaurants who are now serving out there and you have, a waiter or waitress coming out with a tray of drinks and everything, now having to go through the crowd that's walking through the street to get to the tables and back and forth. I also share the Friday night concern.
Yeah.
I don't want, if I'm sitting there, I don't want somebody leaning over me to check out the lovely car that came down, but.
And maybe to that point, again, how I said, maybe it's appropriate for certain restaurants. Maybe it's the one where it is a self-serve and you're going to sit versus the serving right now until we can kind of see how that works. I will say the biggest concern I know on some of the applications we've had recently through ARB were necessarily, it's really about Friday night, because that is different than most towns. And that brings a very different level of concern and, I guess, conflict in the crowds, right? So you have somebody who's eating, but then you have somebody else that might not be there eating, and they're there to go look at the cars, and they can't access them. So I think, to your point, though, I think we can try to look at some kind of balance and maybe where it's appropriate versus maybe not appropriate right now, and then kind of see how those areas do.
And allow it to snake if it
Yeah.
has to.
Yeah, and I like the idea of the, where there's the no parking, but I
Yeah,
also don't want
I
to
do
be
too.
eating, and a car, let's just say, doesn't have the greatest exhaust going on and is blowing out some black smoke right next to me. It's just the way I look at that.
Anybody else on that?
No, I just have a quick question. So the cafe permits is yearly, or is it, once it's issued, it's?
No, it's yearly.
Yearly.
Okay, so
Every
we
year.
can't test it out for a year if it doesn't work then?
Yeah, I'll talk to Borough Hall. We would have to see if we want to test it. We'd have the council discuss it as well, and then we'd have to see how we would allow that to happen. It may just be a council passing a resolution to allow test scenarios, because we do have the ordinance in place.
Anybody else? All right, redevelopment plans, master plan and zoning. I don't know where we stand with our timeline right now. Did we finalize that, where we can get it Okay, thank you. So that will get distributed within the next week? We can get it distributed to you guys so that we can, hopefully at the next meeting, maybe really look at that and then kind of dive into what that means for us. But I know that Colin and crew have been diligently working on that and refining it before it reaches here, so. Improvement coverage, the subcommittee. One of the things that, I know you weren't here last week and I didn't get, last meeting, John, and I didn't get a chance to give you a call, but one of the things that we were thinking about is in that one area that we felt when it came to impervious surfaces and things like that, where you came up with that solution, maybe piecing this, kind of the thought process, right? So originally this was, hey, let's look at everything to make sure we can just put it as a package. And I think that project is a little bit bigger and is delaying some of the needs of residents that we know we can help right now. So I would ask if you could look at that and see if you could put something together that would, kind of like we did with the decks and the pools. We pulled the decks out, let that go forward, and we'll still continue to look at the pools. So if you guys, as a committee, could look at least saying, you know, hey, we're going to address this. And even if it's, you know, every other month, we're updating that. But I think then at least at that point, it allows some relief to residents that are in dire need of that. And we're not delaying it, trying to get this big package of solutions for them.
Yeah, it's a good point, and we had some conversations last week I had with the zoning official and Michael. So it is a bigger item than we could tear apart with one solution
One
for everything.
solution.
So yeah, I agree totally. I'm not sure where we left off with the change of use, if that was, I think we drafted something on that, right?
So maybe we can bring that back, that piece back.
Yeah.
And we'll review that again with fresh eyes, just that piece, and see if we can just push that forward. Okay, perfect, thank you. I know it's not on here because it was last minute, but we had comments, so we did put, Borough Council did you guys introduced, they did have some comments
That's
on the EV ordinance. Ryan, on these, is it easy to see where their comments were?
No, I think it's, all the comments are underlined in black, but I don't know. Maybe Mike knows a little bit more of that.
I think that's, the board made the recommendation to council, and I prepared 2 emails to Kevin. One was the red line, and one is Kevin wants to know where in the land use ordinance. So I did a subsequent email proposing that it goes in section 102-117M. So you see what's in front of you is adding the section to 117, and Kevin underlined the changes,
Okay.
which are essentially what the planning board recommended. And there was some discussion with the council about drilling down further on this in between the first and second reading on this.
Yeah, one of the discussions was gas stations.
Yeah.
You know, and would they be covered by the electrical and fire official? So if they were going to put in, so I think you had said to me that the state of New Jersey requires that gas stations have it now, correct?
Yeah, there is in the regulation that Governor Murphy passed, it basically says you have to allow electrical charging in gas stations without a board approval. So if the board, to drill down on the issue on whether we can put distance requirements in gas stations to look at a more inclusive of all different scenarios, if the board, I think it's something that should be drilled down on.
Yes.
So if the board allows, I'd like to get with Kara on that to see what flexibility. You'll see in the beginning, a lot of these sections of this ordinance cannot be modified.
Right.
It says right from the state, you cannot modify this. So those areas that cannot be modified, what we did is clarify under site safety what we can do. But the comments back from some of the council was that we should take a more inclusive look of gas stations and other uses to see if we can look at meaningful.
Yeah, I think creating some standards, so
Yes.
safety standards.
Yeah.
Correct.
You know, away from buildings, not near combustible elements, how many feet apart. And I don't know if the construction code would address some of that, or the fire code would address some of that. I'm not sure. I just don't
Yeah,
know. I would imagine
good
it
comment.
would.
I just have to drill down to see what we can and can't do. Like we have the IRC, IRBC, the receptacles. There are so many codes that preempt basically the borough's ordinance in terms of what you have to do. So I think if I can sit down with Kara and go through it and say, no, you can't touch that, you can touch that. And so we can clarify, thoroughly vet this in terms of are we addressing all the different scenarios.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good catch and a good comment from the council. Of, you know, while it's before us, we might as well make sure that we are including everything.
Yeah, and I don't know that we're gonna be able to drill down into every scenario, so
No.
I think it's from a construction, electrical, and fire standpoint,
Yeah.
creating a set of standards that then applies across everything.
Well, we addressed residential
Yeah.
and the big, basically commercial on decks, but we didn't address every retail use.
Yeah.
If it's, back to your point.
Yeah.
If it's all included, it's all included, but to look at the gas stations and some other retail uses which specifically are permitted by legislation to see what we can do there, if anything.
Yep.
Safety.
Safety.
Safety,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Safety blanket across.
Safety,
Yeah.
right.
Yep.
Wouldn't other resident or retail uses be covered by surface parking lot? Like a
Yes.
gas station, would be under surface parking lot, would have to follow those regulations. So rather than keep thinking of every possible situation, I mean, there's no other possible situation than these four. If the parking is not in a structure, it has to be on a surface lot. I mean, there's,
It's a good point.
whether it's a Wawa, car dealership, whatever, there's a surface parking lot.
Valid point.
So it kind of, you're covering it there.
It's a good point, Barry.
So maybe to your point, maybe we just add a couple extra safety standards under that surface to make sure that we're addressing
Well, I
in
just
proximity to other things besides a building.
And clarify that it's not just for development, it's for any
Correct.
surface lot.
The clarification would be some scenarios, what the legislation says is no board action, it's not a variance, to make sure those scenarios are covered.
Yeah.
Or at least saying, we can address this, we can't address it. Yes, Barry, you're right, it's a surface parking lot.
Yeah.
However, the statute specifically says gas stations, you must allow bang, bang, boom. So to see what we can do on that.
And it has to be allowed everywhere.
Yeah,
That's
right.
what the legislation basically
Right.
said, you know, you have to
Yeah.
allow them in every location.
Like Barry said, it's a surface lot,
Yeah.
still have to conform with.
I mean, I think the
Yeah.
only thing you might want to confirm is that structure would include a gas pump, which I think it certainly would, because I don't think you would want an EV charger, you know. close
Or a
to-
Wired
propane
to
tank,
it.
you know, something like a
Yeah,
propane
something
tank,
along those
something like
lines.
that, yeah.
Or maybe even a certain distance from where the tanks are fueled.
That's true, I mean, yeah,
So when
or,
the delivery comes in, they open up, you know, whatever, something like that, because that may not be a structure.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I think we just, under that, to his point, under the surface, need to narrow, make some additions in safety precautions that are not what we were thinking as typically a structure.
Yep.
yeah, I like your combustibles, because even with a parking
Right.
garage or anything, if they have a generator that's gas-fed or whatever, you don't want them butting it right up against that either.
Right, it might boil down to some of these, and it's a legal call or interpretation, is we may have to exclude what's specifically said in the legislation in terms of the setbacks, because we don't have the authority. That's something, I'm just
Yeah, well,
throwing
Yeah.
out.
make sure we're not
Yep.
doing anything that violates
Right,
legislation.
Yeah.
I'm throwing out that the question came up, gas stations, it's right in the legislation that you must allow. And back on Barry's point, it might be that we have to call that out, saying, except as otherwise noted in the legislation, to address that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, ARB approval, we had one come through, again, this is so that for everybody's transparency, we had one come through for 5 Michael Lane, it was a fence, you had that in here. Any comments on that, Jason?
No, it's the exact reason we
Yeah.
made that ordinance and
Absolutely.
complied with it and made it easier for them, and it looks good.
Yeah.
It worked.
It worked.
Good job, guys.
Yeah.
Right, but
Pat yourself on the back.
but the planning board has to take action on that, right? The ARB makes a recommendation to this board.
Yeah.
Under this ordinance, yes.
Right.
For this one, yeah, so
Yes.
actually we do.
So
It's
you
not
gotta
a
take some
typical.
action on that.
So I'll make a
Michael.
motion to approve with the recommendation from the ARB.
Second.
Now would this be everybody present eligible to vote?
Yes.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Andrea Dare? Chris Addicks?
Yes.
Art Akins?
Yes.
Larry Cleveland?
I have to abstain.
Jason Kraska?
Yes.
John Manilio?
Yes.
Barry Van Horn?
Yes.
Mayor Gallagher?
Yes.
Councilmember Vroom?
Yes.
Chairperson Werner?
Yes. All right, Chairwoman, comments, I have none, so I am going to move on to opening up the meeting to the public for comments or questions. You're a board member,
I just want to
in
explain.
case you forgot, Larry.
No, I didn't forget. I know exactly who I am. I just want to explain. I've only abstained because I know these people.
I know, yeah.
They're the nicest people in the whole wide world. So since we've already approved it, I can say that.
Sir, if you can just state your name and your address for the record, please.
Sure. Councilman Andrew Conti, 26 East Orchard Street. Couple things. Sidewalk cafes, be great to see some solution that keeps pedestrians going through. So whatever you guys can think of to get it along, we're eager to hear it because we've had many complaints, or at least a couple complaints, and spoken with some business owners that are real egregious on where they put their sidewalk cafe seating. So that's why the enforcement is stepping up as far as that goes. Eager to hear about the master plan and all that, and thank you all for putting in the time on it. One thing that I think is really important.
We like seeing you on television.
I know, he's great. One thing on the improved surface coverage discussions that are going on, just keep in mind that if the water can't pass through it, then it's just going to contribute to flooding. No matter what version of that we have a conversation about, it's always going to come back with the comment that if water can't pass through it, then it's going to contribute to flooding and make it worse for your neighbors. So let's be conscious on how we're developing any type of changes. I personally would like to see one package of changes all happening all at once, because I think it'd be easier to think about it and all the parts put together rather than piecemeal as it comes. But understanding that there's some motivation to have it parts of it go quicker, I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. And on the electric vehicle thing, I was the one who made most of the comments, and my major concern was that we were kind of taking out the teeth of the ordinance to some degree by not allowing it in certain parking decks. I understand concerns about being underneath residences or too close to businesses and buildings where things could burn. I understand the concern of structural, which we talked about afterwards. Damage from fires. Obviously, we'd all love manufacturers to finally get to the point where these fires aren't actually a problem for everybody. Statistically speaking, though, electric vehicle fires happen far less than internal combustion engine fires. The problem is, as we know, you can't put them out. So I would love to hear some more creative thoughts and how you guys come up with this as far as drilling down into the changes to the surface lot for the combustible fuels and making sure that's safe. But also just making sure that when we do this for electric vehicles or other newer technologies, we're not making it prohibitive for the people in town who are going to be adopting them and having them at their homes. But yeah, those are my comments. And again, thank you all for being on the planning board. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? All right, hearing none, I'm going to close public. And I am up for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?